Welcome to the Saturday Morning Nerd Show. I apologize for some of the technical difficulties. We've been off for a month, so of course they were bound to happen. And of course, we also want to give a special shout out to Skynet. You're always working for us brilliantly every podcast. Thank you. So finally back after actually a little over a month, and we actually have Brendan Smith back, who survived the Texas State Fair and didn't have at 5 a.m.
I tell you, just the parking attendants alone were enough to drive you mad. You can't park here. I work here.
You didn't see the shirt?
Or it's $20 to park here, sir. No, I didn't. Have a nice day. Not for me. That's why I got that little sticker.
Yeah. Well, we're glad that you survived. You actually got to sleep in a little bit this morning. That's awesome.
Yeah, Texas OU was the worst of it. I was there from 8:30 to 2 to bartend, had an hour off. Then I worked the door from 3 to 11, and then I helped clean up, and we didn't leave until 1:30 the next morning.
Yuck.
Yeah. That seems about typical. Well, anyway, we've got lots of things to talk about. Now, we do apologize. We're scheduled to do our James Bond podcast today. Didn't quite happen. Alex Moore's not joining us, so we're switching things up a little bit. And we are going to be, we have a fantasy topic. We're going to be talking about our favorite tabletop role-playing fantasy games, as well as introducing you to a fantasy world called the Anmar Chronicles, which has been a project of mine actually before the pandemic, and then like most things got delayed because of the pandemic. But anyway, we're going to rock and roll today. First things first. So, little quick gaming topic. Am I the only one that, after watching the Uncharted trailer drop this week, thought to myself, you know what? I haven't played those games in a while, and immediately wanted to go back and play one of the Uncharted games?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't immediately want to, but it did immediately trigger a thought in my head that movie is 10 years too late.
Yeah. And I mean, we're going to obviously see it as that nerd show. I mean, we're professionals. We're going to check it out. But I'm also not very excited to see it.
An Uncharted game hasn't even dropped in 4 years. Sony completely screwed the pooch on this movie. It should have come out 10 years ago, and it should have had Nathan Fillion and Bruce Campbell.
I know. Yeah. And here's the thing. I think the best Uncharted film that we're going to get was the fan film that Nathan Fillion did like 6 or 7 years ago. I mean, it looks like a fun adventure movie, but I'm sorry, Mark Wahlberg is not Sully. If you've ever played the games, how do you get excited about him as Sully?
I hate to say this, he'd be a better Nathan Drake.
Yeah,
than Sully. He's just so miscast.
I know. And Tom Holland, again, 10 years too late. You're way too young to be Nathan Drake. I mean, I get if you want to set him up in the first part of the film like it's Uncharted 3, where you get the prequel and how he, met Sully, sure.
But the problem is we've literally already had that story. We don't need it. Like it's
right.
It's made for an audience that doesn't exist.
Yeah. I mean, Tom Holland in this movie is to Nathan Drake as what River Phoenix was as Indiana Jones to Harrison Ford. It's
Pretty
like,
much.
give me your little backstory. Fine, sure. And I mean, it looks like, they've got some great Easter eggs and nods to the game, but I just find myself looking at that, the trailer and thinking, I just really want to go back and play Uncharted. And I was one of the guys. I was late to the party about playing those games. I didn't really start playing them until we started beefing up our gaming coverage, and you guys would get text messages from me. Oh my God, this is awesome!
We still do. To clarify, we still fucking do.
But anyway, yeah, I just thought to myself, I kind of want to start Uncharted 2 over again. And I did. Last night.
Honestly, who would have made a really good Nathan Drake? Clint Eastwood's kid, Scott Eastwood.
Yeah, I know. Right. I know. And he's got a movie coming out here in a couple of weeks with Mel Gibson, where Mel Gibson plays his psychiatrist. And I guess some kind of revenge flick. And Scott Eastwood goes all, it's like the younger version of his dad in Gran Torino, where he goes all ape shit on people. It looks kind of interesting. We'll definitely check it out. But anyway,
that's called Dangerous for those who were wondering.
Yeah,
I just looked it up, so I didn't know beforehand. But
Mel Gibson as the psychiatrist is dangerous, if you ask me. But
I was about to say, I've just heard two names in a row that I'm sick and tired of hearing. One is Mark Wahlberg, and the other is Mel Gibson, and I'm just like, guys, why?
Over it.
Yeah, it's.
Well, if it makes it better, Femke Janssen is also in it. So.
Well, yeah, that's my main reason.
Xenia on the top.
Hey, still one of the top 5 Bond girls.
Straight up with a twist.
No.
Anyway, as I said, we'll check the movie out next February. But I can't really get that excited for it as much as I do when I, play the Uncharted games. And by the way, if you are a PlayStation Plus, customer, like most people are who have a PlayStation, you can actually just download them all for free now. I believe last year during the pandemic, they made the first 3, the little trilogy legacy set completely free, whether you had a membership or not. So now's a good time to go back and play the Uncharted.
The other really concerning thing about that movie is it's been in like Duke Nukem Forever development hell. It's had half a dozen directors, half a dozen writers, probably 20 producers over the years.
Right.
This is not a recipe for success, folks.
No.
Man,
it's going to be about as well received as Alicia Vikander's Tomb Raider, which is to say, not very well received.
Dude, this thing is going to be fucking cheekier than an Ed Wood film, dude. I can already feel it.
Oh,
my thing about Tomb Raider, to Chad's point, it wasn't a great movie. It was an okay movie. I definitely appreciate their nods to the games. And I like Alicia Vikander. I mean, she wouldn't have been my first choice. But honestly, it was Walter Goggins that I really loved in that movie.
I love Walton Goggins in anything.
Yeah.
Sorry, Walton Goggins. I said Walter.
Yeah, he's Boyd Crowder, man.
Yeah. I mean, if there's ever a time like I've heard 2 people this past week. Actually, my own mother was like, "I'm looking for a new show. Have you watched Justified?"
Yeah.
What is that? I've heard about that. And I'm like, remember how right I was on the show Longmire and how you love that? Well, you'll love Justified.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a great, like, if you like this, you'll love that either way.
Yeah. So, but we'll see what happens with it. All right. Check out some of our reviews that have come out this past week. We'll actually have our full review on Far Cry 6. We could spend an entire hour about. Oh, we should. You know what? It's okay. Calm down. Calm down, Scott.
I immediately looked at Scott. I could hear his eyes rolling.
Breathing exercises. Anyway,
needs a little WD-40 in the sockets.
What I was going to say about the review is, unlike other outlets who shall not be named, IGN.com, we don't accept payment for reviews. We don't go goo-goo over games when they pay us lots of money to make it sound better than it really is.
To be fair, though, I'd like to be offered.
I'd love to be offered too. I would love to be offered, and then I would love to then turn around and reject it, and then write an article about the fact of how some motherfucker just tried to bribe me for shit.
No, I would just like to get to the point where we're big enough where they actually want to bribe us.
That'd be lovely. Yeah,
we're getting there. We're gonna get there. And we will take into consideration your bribery. But of course, you could just do it like anybody else and just pay for some full page ads. If you want to pay for some full page ads with your own writer saying how great the game is, sure, we'll take that money. We're just not putting our name on the review. We have some standards. With that said,
but
With that said, we'll talk more about that at a later date with our new issue that's coming out this week. And, just a little taste of some of the things that we are talking about. It is a game topic, and we're going to basically be talking about the future of sports games, which could also be its very own podcast. But I wanted to mention one quick thing. It's been a while since I've been that excited about like a sports game and actually giving a true like high rating to a sports game. And I honestly feel like that NHL has finally caught up with everything else, using the Frostbite engine. I'm always a little biased because I love hockey games, but the improvements they made on gameplay, even as frustrating as it is, and Scott and I had a chance to play online, they are definitely there, and this is something we've been waiting for in a hockey game for a long time. It's almost perfect, not quite. They're still they still need to understand how the penalties work. Like, I swear to God, I never get a penalty shot called on me. You can't, when I get past the defenseman and they cross-check me in the back as I'm about to shoot, they never call that. I'm like, do your developers understand the penalties in hockey? Seriously.
I'm just glad to say that they've improved. I'm just glad to hear that they've improved a sports game because, let's be honest, EA does not have the greatest track record in that regard.
No. It's
like Madden's been the same game since 2017.
Well, 2018 when they went to the Frostbite engine, but yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like.
Honestly, I feel the only reason why they did it was because they're kind of at the point where they fucking had to. Because if they didn't, it's going to be.
That's probably more truth to it than any of us would like to admit.
But, with that said, too, I'm anxious to get back to having our own little staff, hockey tournament. I'm very much looking forward to challenging Brendan again, because we had a lot of fun years ago doing our own little Stanley Cup. And Scott and I have had some really great games. But I think this is a great version to be able to have that. And, it finally caught up and they've made those, great improvements.
I don't think you and I have ever played a game where it hasn't been decided by one goal.
No, not at all. Not at all. But as I said, if there's one sports game that truly is worth the full price, it is NHL this year. Everything else definitely was like, why are you trying to gouge me on a retail price again? But anyway, that's for our article next week, and we'll get into the reason why we're taking these companies to task, stuff like that. All right. Before we get to our main topic, we do have this week's Sign of the Apocalypse, and we wanted to. It's actually about the reviews on Dune Part 1, and the reason I'm saying that it's Dune Part 1 is I don't think some of the people who reviewed this film understand that or have never read the book. Brendan, I'll let you start with what you thought your favorite review was, or what your favorite review is of Dune.
My favorite review are the people, favorite criticism, if you will, because I've seen it in multiple outlets, is the movie felt unfinished. No shit, Sherlock. It's part 1 or 2.
Right.
Would you like to state anything else blatantly obvious for us? Like the sun will rise, the water is wet.
Right. I mean, that's the equivalent of people saying the same thing like about the Infinity War movie. Like, are we going to get a second part? They're not going to end it this way. No, they've already said this is part 1.
Yeah, like it says right in the trailer, Infinity War Part 1. It's like people go into the Lord of the Rings when the Fellowship of the Ring, they're just going to end it like that? No, there's 2 more movies coming. There's 2 more books.
Yeah.
Oh my God. We're never going to find out what happened to Han Solo. Fuck.
I think some of my favorite reviews of Dune is, and this has been more than one source, including even some local press in Dallas, who just kind of annoy me. But that's, I'll just say that we disagree on our perspectives when it comes to film. The African American characters aren't as prominent? Why do they have to be servants? Why are we focusing on all the white characters? And to my answer to that is, well, clearly you've never read the books and you don't understand how they describe the royal houses. And by the way, they just replaced a white character from the original story in the first movie with a black character.
2, actually.
And we don't get to understand about those other plans until part 2 of the story. Like, literally, they ended this movie right where part 1
Also,
ends.
maybe Frank Herbert was using allegory to tell a story about how a white dominated society was then upheaved through people trying to gain an equal foothold.
Or people that that they view to be primitive or savage, that or not worth
Really
their time.
Yeah, they just choose to live differently.
People that are complaining about this, let this be the word of the day. We're gonna sound like Eddie Murphy from SNL. Allegory. You should look that up. You might need a dictionary.
Can you say allegory?
Actually, I
Could.
just want to turn around and I want to just do an old shout out to a very, very old thing called Hooked on Phonics, because you motherfuckers need it. And because no one seems to know what the fuck critical thinking is whenever it comes to any fucking storytelling.
Right.
Holy shit. It says part 1. Do you know what part 1 means? It means one of something other. So
More to follow.
Yeah.
Right.
So
It
what
ain't
the
done
fuck?
yet.
Secondly, as many people have done, all you have to do is type into the fucking Google box Dune. And you know what you're going to get? You're going to get 15 different fucking answers. And you know why? Because there's books, variations of the books, comic books of the fucking books, fucking fan art, cartoons, fucking sci-fi films that were fucking made by the Sci-Fi Channel. Find them.
Just to emphasize your point, Scott, typing in Dune into the Google box nets you 278 million results in 0.89 seconds.
There you go.
And here's the thing, okay? You didn't really pick up on this. The natives that you're complaining aren't being prominent enough in part 1, they're called freemen, okay? So again, that might be a metaphor for something.
And by the way, they're the entire focus of part 2.
Right.
And all of Frank Herbert's later work.
Yes.
And here, by the way, just another old throwback, because Scott reminded me with his wonderful Hooked on Phonics reference. I saw somebody the other day who looked like they got their hair cut by losing a fight with a Flowbee. So,
well, okay. Here, I think this is actually my favorite thing that people were griping about this movie. Okay, now I'm going to preface this to say that if you haven't seen it yet, watch it and know that it's part 1. Okay, enjoy the visuals and story. I mean, this is probably as close to the book as you're going to get. And Villanueva has done a tremendous job from that standpoint. Okay, but it is unfinished, and you're right about that. Okay. Sorry, I'm losing my train of thought there, but for everybody, quit harping on stupid shit when you don't really know the backstory. You've never read the book to begin with, okay? And understand that maybe, again, there is more to come, okay? But if you are literally a reviewer that this is your one criticism, is you spend an entire review talking about the Freeman suits and how they glossed over one important fact, and it's not true sci-fi, and this was by Polygon, and yes, I'm calling you out because you guys are fucking idiots. Literally stating, well, they don't talk about how, everybody poops in the movie and how you're basically having to poop and pee in the suit at the same time, and it's being recycled. And, you don't see people using a toilet or squatting out in nature. That's what you're harping on?
Hey,
That's
There are no
what
bras
you're
in Star
complaining
Wars,
about.
you know. Remember?
Nothing has upset me more consistently in my movie going life than the fact that they always gloss over how they never show people taking a dump or a piss. It has bothered me from the moment I started watching film. They never show people taking a shit on screen.
You know
Damn
what?
it, my life has been so empty.
If they're going to be true to storytelling, show how it's real.
God,
Why
life,
did we never
your
get
life
that
can't
scene?
be full if the bowl is empty.
Why did we never get that scene in Next Generation where Captain Picard is trying to take a dump and he is interrupted by Data knocking on the door and he is just like,
damn it, Data, I'm pinching a loaf in here.
Of all the things that are important that would have helped the story.
Just imagine him with his
Captain,
little
Captain, what are you trying to
man-
do? I'm dropping the kids off at the pool. I didn't think you
Dropping
had
the
any
deuce,
children.
Data.
Look,
Make it so number one. I have to make it number two.
Number 2.
Sorry.
I say
Low
this
hanging
from the
fruit. I'm
bottom
sorry.
of my
I'm sorry.
heart, okay, obviously, if you've watched our show, we have a great time. We crack jokes, we're all friends, and it's like a dinner conversation. And it's great
With a
that
2-drink minimum.
anybody can start a podcast, record a video, start a blog, and write a review. That's awesome. It's a very populous thing. But should you?
Thank you, Dr. Ian Malcolm.
Part of it is
Dadgummit, damn it.
Okay. Part of it
I think if they should.
of making it unique and worth reading and all that is actually looking at the bigger picture, the grand scope of things, okay, and not harping on shit like, no pun intended, that they didn't take a shit in their suits and we
Like-
don't see that.
It's like, was it a good story? Was it well constructed? Was it well told? Did the actors do a good job? Was the direction well done? Was it well shot? These are things that can be critiqued and reviewed. Who gives a shit where they're shitting?
Pun intended.
What were they expecting? I mean, seriously, were they expecting that moment like whenever Steve Martin in Dirty Rotten Scoundrel said, "May I go to the bathroom, please?" Need to stand there and
Or Ace Ventura when he comes out, do not go in there.
not go in there.
All we're saying,
Come on.
if that's what you're going to waste your ink on, is talking about, certain races aren't prominent enough when it's only part one of a book, or, you're focusing too much on white characters or how they use the bathroom, just stop. Or, as Brendan pointed out, it feels unfinished. You don't need, we should take away your privileges at this point. Okay?
Like you're just bitching at something to bitch at it. That's all you're doing.
Right.
Oh, my favorite criticism so far has been the color palette is too mundane and monochrome. I'm like, it's a desert
fucking
planet.
desert.
What do you?
I'm sorry.
Okay. Can't argue with that logic.
Well, we'll be sure to throw in all those paisley colors that you've seen from desert terrain. And
Yeah, no
It's
shit.
like, sorry, we can't all be Borderlands. Okay.
by the way, were there lots of bright colors in any of the desert areas of Star Wars?
No.
Anyway, all
Except
right.
for the sun.
Yeah,
Suns. Sorry.
we've harped on this enough, but yeah, this is this week's Sign of the Apocalypse. It's just, I'm sorry, but some of you actually need to go back to school and learn how to write a constructive review, or as Scott pointed out, relearn critical thinking. So anyway, we'll move right along. For those of you that haven't seen it, don't listen to these half-assed people complaining about the movie. Go into it and enjoy it for yourself. And please realize that it's only part one of a bigger story. And it's only setting up what is about to come. And by the
Don't
way,
listen to their half-ass review. Listen to our full-ass review.
Yes.
I don't want to do nothing with
Cheek
half an
review on
ass.
this thing.
and by the way, they actually have filmed part two. There is this Jason Momoa was actually talking about earlier this year that he thought that they should just release the entire thing all at once and let people sit in the theater. And I'm like, I would totally do that
I
personally.
would do that.
But I understand how you had to maximize, the money that you can make by splitting it into 2 parts. But the bright side is, at least you didn't break it up into 3 parts like the Hobbit novel. I still don't know how you got 9 hours out of that book, but kudos to you, Peter Jackson. Anyway, all right, moving right along. We're going to jump back. We're going to jump into our topic. And the reason this is a good segue is we're actually going to talk about story building and lore and why it's necessary and what makes great role playing, tabletop fantasy fantastic. So I want to begin it this way. Everybody, how you kind of got into it. Now, Chad, you were texting me last night that you hadn't played since 1983, right?
Right.
What have you been doing with your life? Jesus.
I put down my dice and picked up a joystick, basically. I mean,
is that a metaphor?
Yeah.
A metaphor?
Yeah.
The dice dropped
There
and
you
the joystick
go.
became the
It was
There you
about that
go.
point in his life, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, basically, okay, honestly, the guys that I was, that we had started the campaign with, we went from elementary school to middle school, and that's when the cliques start to develop, at least in most people's experiences.
Right.
People that you grew up with, that you were buddy with from kindergarten through 6th grade, and then all of a sudden people that were your best friends for 5-6 years, you go to 7th grade, they don't know who the hell you are anymore. And when their interests change, and when their big brother was your dungeon master, and you don't get invited over to that house anymore, your supply gets cut off. And
I think you might have some feelings of regressed anger here. Would you like to work through it?
Just a tad.
Where's Sprinkle Chef popping up just over Chad?
Just a little salty.
So I got a ColecoVision and a Commodore 64 and just kind of moved in a different direction away from tabletop.
Well, and to Chad's point on that, I mean, having a great group of friends that love the same thing. That I didn't actually get into all of this until I was more of an adult, and the people that I play with are all good friends. We all like the same things. We don't care about the cliques. We're not trying to be popular and all that. And it's also, Chad, I think the biggest disappointment is you didn't have the same kind of friends from Stranger Things, and you didn't have a girl with mysterious powers drop in your life and live, in a town where shit was going sideways.
Actually, I did. That was another issue, because that was the year that I met the woman I'm married to.
Ooh.
Coincidence?
There you go. Well, there you go. But
what I'm understanding here is that you started playing with your stick and you met a woman.
Yes. Yeah. Funny how that works out, isn't it?
There's
Scott.
girls out there that's like,
I'm just looking at
they
Scott's
know
face.
my life. They know what's going on with me at school. Sorry, kid. That's every teen. That's every prepubescent teenage. It happens.
God, do you have a puke bucket on the floor next to you or something?
No, I unfortunately was in the Air Force, and so I have learned how to control my gag reflex, and I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. Hey, Marcus, you
Scott,
asked.
Scott, how about you? When did you get into tabletop fantasy games?
Okay, so like most people who got into tabletop, I was an ugly child. And people didn't like me very much. So when I was about 12, 13 years old, I was rummaging through like a friend's dad's stuff with him, and then we found some old D&D stuff. And we kind of started, fucking around with it from there. And then I couldn't tell my parents because they thought I would be possessed by the devil. So that was probably about, when was I 12? 98. So that's when I got into D&D tabletop stuff. And I'm still in tabletop stuff. So I've DM'd several campaigns. I have my own homegrown campaign that I use for myself, in my little fun times. But no, I when I was in college, I was part of an active group where we would play like 5-6 hour sessions on the weekends, multiple days in a row. Just get drunk and play role play games. So yeah.
Cool. And Brendan, when was your first experience?
20 years old, building 55, Ford Island, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, in the barracks. You can only play so many games of spades and hearts.
Yep.
And eventually you just end up finding your way into D&D, and I've been there ever since. As a matter of fact, I just reconnected with my last game. I had to step away from that game because of work conflicts, and then COVID hit. And so one of them just reached out and was like, hey, would you be interested in coming back to game? And I was like, yeah, actually. He said, great, because we've had a string of terrible players since you left, and we really miss you.
That's awful. I hate that shit so much.
There were people that just didn't understand what role playing was. He goes, there was one guy that just looked at his phone the entire time. It was like, yeah, sure. He goes, you understand how to build a character, how to interact with the story. Hell, you even do voices for your characters. So, but yeah, so yeah. I just went and upped my character from level 6 to level 8 last night. So not tomorrow, but next week I go back, because I already had plans for tomorrow that I can't break. But so next Sunday I'll be back in that game, and it's a lot of fun. We that group is full of really seasoned players who have all been playing for at least 20 years. The DM is a 55-year-old guy who's been DMing for 35 years. And it's just really cool. I mean, the group is very tactical. We think decisions through. The DM has gone to work because one of his buddies at work DMs a different game, and he's like, yeah, he goes, I throw all this crazy stuff at these players and they find the most imaginative ways to get out of it. And so it's a lot of fun. It's a really good group to be in. It's really well balanced. And my current character is Vladis Navillo. He is a half elf warlock who basically all of his talents are used towards being a spy. He can breathe underwater. He's by the time he's level 20, he's going to be able to fly. He's going to be able to turn immaterial, cross over into the astral plane. So we can just like, okay, I go invisible, I go astral, I go right through a wall, and I'm inside and I'm looking through all your paperwork.
Right.
So he's a half elf 007.
It's kind of funny that you even like mentioned that. Like, I mean, my first experience was, ironically enough, a small college in Kansas that I went to for a year when I still wanted to play college sports and got a music scholarship. And there were kids in the dorm room that were on the top floor were always gaming, and somebody, you brought out D&D, and I didn't like, you'd heard it, but I never really like had friends in high school that played it or anything. And unfortunately grew up during the 80s with all the craze, like, oh my God, it's devil worship, and
God, yeah,
and all this fucking nonsense.
That's why I was so pissed at Riverdale. I still have not watched a single episode of Riverdale since they went down that trope.
Yeah, you know what? That show actually kind of started out cool, but I had to quit after a couple of seasons. Like it's too drawn out more than anything else, and it was just ridiculous.
Yeah, shouldn't they be all like graduated college by now? This show's been going for like 7 seasons.
You know what? If I'm going to watch a high school show about, little weird tropes and shit happens and they're getting themselves into messes, I'm just going to go back and start watching Smallville again. Minus all the Dawson's Creek.
Just watch fucking Scooby-Doo. Quit watching shit from the fucking, Warner Brothers. Those motherfuckers have a bad habit of just manifesting cults for some reason, and we got to figure that out.
I can do both. Yeah, it's funny to think about Smallville now. Since they did celebrate its 20th anniversary, minus one important character because she's now in prison. But
yeah, it's just
forever.
We don't talk about that.
She's on the reboot of Orange is the New Black.
Nice. Anyway, but I'm like, it's a great time to go back and watch. But now you can literally skip over all of the ridiculous filler episodes that it was just like, am I really watching Dawson's Creek with Superman? Don't care. Get to the good lore. So really, if you do it that way, it's only technically 5 seasons instead of 10. And Scooby-Doo never fails. But anyway, yeah, I had a guy in college who introduced it to me, and we used to make jokes that it is a Christian school, and you always had some people like, well, that just seems like something you shouldn't do, and blah blah. It's like it's role playing fantasy like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, which actually, I mean, that stuff would come out. Movies came out after but and then a few times with Brendan and Mark and Deb. I didn't always stick around. I was very limited because I was always out dating and doing my thing. But anyway.
Okay, that's what we're calling it
now. And I will say, most of the time, he didn't get stabbed.
Most of the time.
It only happened once on a date.
I said most.
There's other crazy shit that's happened. But anyway, so here's my next question, and then we'll kind of move along here. How do you go about building a character? What's your go-to way of building a character? I'm going to start with you, Scott.
My go-to way of building a character is first things first is I pick the dog shit out of the brain of the DM. I want to know as much as I can about the world that I'm about to be in. And if they don't have answers for me, oh man, they better make some quick. So because I'm unfortunately one of those players that I see the side of the situation the DM doesn't necessarily expect. And things happen. Burning down half a forest, things like that. But no, for me, it is, I just try to immerse myself in the knowledge of the world. And then what I do is I just figure out what would be the most fun kind of character to play based on that world. If I'm in a world where, everybody's kind of, the high corporate ladder, everything's run by guilds or businessmen and everything else like that. I depends on my mood. I might go with the high corporate mercenary climbing the ladder, or I might go with the thief just trying to be out on his own, who's just like, I don't give a fuck the system, So who knows? But no, first thing first is always start out with the knowledge of the world, because if you don't know the world, you can't do shit. So
right. That's kind of been my, as much as I love Dungeons and Dragons, I think that's kind of been my biggest complaint is, the lore gets convoluted and I don't really know. I have to think in grants. I have to think of it in terms of a map. Where are things? What's really going on? What's the history behind it? I kind of want I'm like you. I want all of those details. I want to be able to look something up about how did we get to this point and what's really kind of going on in the story. kind of like you do with history. So, but I've done stuff before where it's just like, hey, it sounds cool. It sounds like you're just doing like a battle or whatever, but I don't know anything really about this world. I mean, what's everybody's motivation? And it's something that I don't think, DMs have really thought out per se. It's just, here, we're going to have a battle, blah, blah, blah. It's like, okay, well, that's cool, I guess. Anyway, Brendan, how do you go about building a character?
So I come at it from a slightly different perspective, because depending on my character might not have all that world knowledge. And so, I might want to discover some of that in game. So what I generally do is, because a lot of people have their go-to race class combos that they like to play, right? And I used to be that way too. I was always a rogue. Like that, I just love the versatility of the rogue, especially in 3.5 when you could just be a giant skill monkey and do all types of crazy shit. But I've kind of grown out of that. I've learned to enjoy other classes and other racial combos, and so my first thing is I poll the other players and find out what they want to play. Because generally speaking, players have very strong ideas on what they want to play, where I'm a bit more malleable. So I'll find out. So if the group is short on healing, I'll play a cleric or a druid. If the group is short on damage, okay, I might be a warlock or a wizard or a rogue. If the group is short on support, I'm going to be a bard. If it's short on frontline tanking, I'm going to be a fighter. And I love that D&D 5th edition allows you to do different things as a fighter, because back in 3.5 it was like, I swing sword over and over again. You got 5 attacks at 20th level. Basically all you did is swing the sword 5 times. Now you can do a lot of cool different things in the structure of the game. So that's basically where I start. And then once I have the idea of what type of class, what role I want to fill, then I take a look at what class, is of that role. Is there a class that I prefer to play more? Is it something I haven't done at all lately? So then I look for whichever class just jumps out at me and grabs me for whatever reason. And from there, I try to make a build in that class that will fill that role, that's maybe a unique take on it that the other players haven't seen before. Just to, especially if I'm playing with less experienced players who just assume wizard throw fireball.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. I'm going to try and make that character as interesting and unique as of a wizard as possible, and just do completely different things with it and expand the players' ideas of what they can do with their own class. They see me do something crazy, not so much crazy, but use it in a way that's not immediately apparent in order to affect the game. And that might give them ideas on how to use the tools in their toolbox.
Oh man, it'd be so much fun to play with you. God.
So that's basically where I go from there. I'm not so worried about, not so much worried about min-maxing. I mean, I will in my stats, as far as my core stats, but then, I really get into, okay, now I know the character class. Now I know like the kind of build I want to do. Now I get into the role playing aspect of it. And now I pay, okay, what drives this character? Who is he? Where is he from? What's happened to him in his life? Why is he an adventurer? Because normal people don't go adventuring, because normal people die.
Or they stay at home, and that's why they're not there, because they're farming.
Exactly. So that's when I get into the the more, now that I've got the structure of the character, the framework, and what he can do. Now I get into, why does he do it? So yeah, that's kind of how I go about building a character, and then it just goes from. And I will actually go so far as to, in D&D 5th edition, I'll go so far as to plan the character, like my half-elf warlock that I was just talking about. He's completely planned out to 20th level. So all I have to do is, when the DM says, okay, you're now level 9, all I do is just plug in my level 9 stuff, because I already have it all figured out. We don't have to wait to next session because people have to, like in my group, everybody's done this. So we don't have to wait till the next session for everybody to level up and get their characters. We already know what's going to happen at the next level because we've all planned our characters out. So it's a very quick transition. You don't need an entire week to figure out what am I going to do going from level 8 to 9, because it's already there. You just plug and play and go.
Yeah. Hey, Chad, if you were to jump back in to tabletop fantasy, how would you build a character?
Usually, if memory served me correctly, what I normally did was always focused on weaponry, not so much on armor. And I was always more or less a support character, where if they needed me to come in and just start hacking away at something, I'm not saying I was on a Leroy Jenkins level, but
I was gonna say, sounds like a barbarian to me.
More or less. More or
I
less.
like weapons. What about armor?
Yeah. I just did a lot of
squish.
I make squish. I would just go in and kind of help do the grunt work, and then when I would start to wear down, they would put me in the back of the room. So I would come in and just try to administer as much damage on whatever boss character or mid-boss character we were focusing on, and then we shared the spoils. I moved quick. I came in, hacked away at a relatively decent to sometimes overpowered sword that I had, and then once I started taking damage, I'm like, okay, pull him out. Let's push forward.
So definitely a barbarian.
Yeah.
Yep.
Nice. I think the first time I actually played with Brendan and other friends, I started with like a half elf ranger, and I'm still kind of playing it. That's actually my character starting in the Anmar Chronicles. But I spent like 2 weeks. I outlined the character like I would a story. Like I had this whole thing that would have ended up being a twist. Like, what is this world? Where is he coming from? Motivation, yada, yada, yada. I treated it like that because I didn't want just a character that sounded cool with some weapons. I'm like, I have to know everything. And I ended up developing what I would have done as a fantasy trilogy at that time. I mean, this was, 7-8 years ago, maybe? And just built, and for me, it wasn't so much about the characters, it just was everything around and what was going on and the characters I interacted with it. I don't even know if that's really the correct way about it. I think for me, it was just, that's how I think in terms of storytelling, is not only the character and their motivations, but that world around them, or how they fit within a world by the game master. So it ended up being something else besides just playing a character more than anything else. Again, I'm not saying that's the correct way. I'm just saying that's how my brain works because I'm a storyteller. And I think that's, to me, that's kind of the most important thing in any kind of fantasy, is really, really, as Scott pointed out, really knowing that world that you're creating, and the politics of it, and you write down the commerce more than anything else. And just from things that I've experienced, when I've played with other people, or from D&D, it's like I don't always get that, and that's really my biggest complaint. Is, okay, here's a world, we're going to go off, we're going to battle, we're going to do things, but why? There's always that question of why this is happening. And which is kind of ironic, because I'm watching my niece and nephew tonight that kind of got sprung on me, and I'm like, tonight's a good opportunity to teach them about tabletop fantasy, because I'm a good uncle. And I've been crafting a campaign, something that would be kind of interesting, especially for my 6-year-old niece. And I'm like, well, let's, simple story. I mean, you can kind of steal from Super Mario or Zelda or whatever, that there's a princess that's been kidnapped, we have to go rescue her. But then there's this whole motivation behind it, why, and the politics behind it. And I started crafting everything late last night and really making notes like a story, and then trying to type everything out in the beginning parts of a campaign. It's like, this isn't just we're going to go rescue a princess. There's like everything involved, and there's a reason that these characters are coming together to go on this mission and all this world. And then, you know, what's the timeline, you know, in the history of Anmar and stuff.
Well,
That's my
and I wanted to comment just on that real quick, because that's a good mark of a DM. If you are planning for essentially the weird, wacky questions a 6-year-old can generate, you'll be prepared for anything. You really will. Because I mean, honestly, I mean, just think about it. I mean, you know, it's 12 in the, you know, it's 12 at midnight. You know, you've been slamming down beers and Mountain Dew to stay awake, and you know, you're on your 5th tray of fucking, you know, pizza rolls, and the DM puts you in an impossible situation, and you just go, fuck it. Then
Yeah, like the old saying in the military that, you know, even the best plans don't survive the first contact with the enemy.
yeah,
Your campaign will not survive first contact with the players.
no.
Because the players will do something stupid.
Panic.
Or my favorite question.
Yes, it does happen, and I think that's kind of the brilliance of everything.
My favorite question right there.
Yeah.
But why?
But why?
I'm the DM.
Also,
that's why.
Also, I want to thank Scott for pointing out 2 things that I have not gone to the grocery store to get: Mountain Dew and pizza rolls.
There you go.
Don't feed children that. Get them juices and proper made meals, for fuck's sake. Give them samosas.
Wait, whoa. Who said they were getting anything?
You're talking about them.
Hey, I got pizza rolls in the fridge, man. I mean,
I grabbed a Mountain Dew the
also
other day.
why I have this wonderful physique, but you know, hey.
Yeah, I'm not supposed to drink Mountain Dew, and I'm like, but it tastes so good sometimes, and you know, it's like barely ice cold. And anyway.
That is the one thing where I am healthy. I haven't drank soda in about 11 years because I was, you know, it was coming up on my wedding because, you know, I got married 10 years ago next month, and I'm sitting there trying to lose weight. And I'm like, well, what can I cut out? And I look at soda and I'm like, okay, 33 grams of sugar per soda. And I was like, that sounds like a lot, but I have no frame of reference because we're Americans. We don't know what a gram is. So
We're doing Coke.
yeah. So unless you do Coke, you have no idea what a gram is. So I looked up how much is in a packet of sugar, and it's 2 to 3 grams of sugar. So that means there's between 11 and 16 packets of sugar in every soda. And I was like, dear God, I would never eat that much. Why would I drink it? So yeah, I haven't been able to, I quit drinking soda right then and there. And now whenever I taste it, it's so sweet, I can't drink it. Like I can't even put sugar in my coffee. I'm drinking my coffee black, you know, no sweetener.
Unfortunately, it's that goddamn Dr. Pepper.
See, that's Erin too. Erin mainlines, yeah, well, she's not so much anymore, but she used to mainline Dr. Pepper into her veins. Now it's cherry Coke.
So, all right, moving right along. I wanted to introduce the Annmar Chronicles on this podcast. Like I said, my fantasy project, and kind of get into how this came about, my arguments against D&D, and as I stated before, really dealing with lore and storytelling. And these guys are going to ask me questions. But before we do that, I'm going to try to use Zoom to share screen real quick. And I'm going to show you the trailer.
So I'd just like to say, am I the only one that's just a little disappointed he didn't
Sure.
use any footage from Monty Python and the Search for the Holy Grail.
Just a touch. Just a touch.
That's your chief criticism.
Just a touch.
I actually had somebody ask about that. It's like, oh man, that's awesome. Man, how much did it cost you to pay those actors? I'm like, not a thing. It's called free use footage. I'm sure they were paid, just not by me. And
just working to kill a rabbit next time, and we're good.
I'm sorry, I've already let everybody down. Speaking of that little side thing, and then we'll get back to this. I have a friend I used to do comedy with who had a severe accident many years ago and lost part of a leg and an arm. And to her credit, to her sense of humor, when she got past all the rehab and stuff like that, that next Halloween, you know exactly what her costume was.
She did not cosplay as the Black Knight. Do not.
She did.
God.
And literally posted,
just a flesh wound. Yeah. That's a soul.
I was like, God bless you, Lauren. Anyway. All right. So starting a fantasy project, I had this idea a few years ago about kind of bringing together a collaborative world where writers, illustrators, and those who play role-playing games can come together and kind of build the lore and write the history instead of it just being one single vision. Single visions are good. I mean, I get people's, perspective and what they want to do with it. But I also think that you can have a lot of great perspectives that help build upon stories, while, establishing the building blocks there. And as I stated before, I think there's too many worlds that kind of get convoluted in their lore that don't have enough people to kind of, I guess, keep it organized, but it's too easy to get lost. Excuse me. So from my perspective, it's okay. What's the beginning? And where does history start? How did this world come about? Where are we right now? And I'm always thinking in linear terms. So when I started writing a story in this world, because I actually started with that first, I thought, okay, it's got to be in the first age. We have to establish what's going on in the world, after the fall of the gods, that kind of thing. And what is the biggest thing hindering this world? These kingdoms, do people really remember the gods? Are they removed enough that it seems more like myth? There was once magic or the power of the gods, and it's not in the world anymore. And there's always prophecies and that they might come back. And I think that's kind of like any history where there's always prophecies about stuff that's bound to happen. That's part of your myth building, a way to tell about a better future. Whether you call it heaven or something else, that's, pretty standard in storytelling. And I know some people just kind of automatically drop like in the middle, and there's all this 1,000 years beforehand and stuff. As Game of Thrones became so popular, and then they basically established that, oh no, there's like 1,000 years worth of history and going back, and then Targaryens came over and conquered. But this is the story we're telling. But there's all this that you had to establish before that helps tell this story. And I'm like, well, that's great, but why don't we actually start at the beginning and show where it really picks up and where magic comes back into the world and, the motivation. So I kind of started 100 years after the fall of the gods, in the first age. And I honestly thought that would be kind of cool from a role-playing standpoint too, to actually have something that is in the first age where you're kind of limited before the world really expands into, in the second and third ages. So when we started talking about like a role-playing aspect of this game, and I got to thank Brendan and our buddy James and Scott, who's had a lot of advice too. We started actually beta testing this a little bit last year with kind of a half-assed campaign that I didn't really complete, and that was my fault. I didn't really think it through. And here's the thing. Note to game masters: have really good friends that can help put you back to reality and steer you in the right direction with good beer, because that's always a big help. And it kind of just changed a little bit over time, during the pandemic, as I got to focus a little bit more about where we were going with this particular campaign, but role playing in general. And Brendan talks about the the 5th edition of D&D, about expanding upon the rules about what you can and cannot do. Every role playing thing has to start somewhere. You start with building blocks of what role playing is and what it is for your world, and it doesn't apply to every world. You have to start somewhere. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, you got to. Yeah. I mean, you got to get your basic rule set down. I mean, even D&D, regardless of what edition it has, you're going to have 3 basic core rule books. You're going to have your player's handbook, your dungeon master's guide, and your monster manual. That's been the same since AD&D. Right. And that's what, 4 editions ago now. Well, actually, technically, I guess 5 if you count 3.5 and 3 is 2 separate editions. But so yeah, you've got to get your basic rule sets down, and then you can add other supplements later that expand on it. Right. And also, it's kind of unfair to compare Anmar to D&D 5th edition, because you have 40 plus years of iteration and refinement, plus 5-6 editions. They call it 5th edition, but like I said, there's 3, 5, and then anyway, I'm not getting into all that, but I'll get lost in those weeds. Right. But you have 40 years of iteration and world building that has gotten it to that point. So it's a very refined system, and there are parts, if you break down 5th edition, there are parts of AD&D in there. There are parts of 3.5 in there. There are parts of 4th edition in there. So this is basically, Anmar's more like D&D circa 1978 than it is D&D 5th edition. And that's not to say it's bad. It's just that's the beginning.
Well, and I think that's because I had somebody ask me about that once, and it's like, well, are you used to playing out of the 5th edition of D&D? Well, yeah. Well, we're not that. You're talking about something that has developed over 40 years. I think you. Well,
and I think it's very important to realize too, it's not a straight D20 system either. It's so if you're coming in there thinking it's just going to be D20 with a new skin, Marcus isn't building a new campaign setting for D&D. It's a new game, and I think that's a very important. Just because it's fantasy and just because it's pen and paper and rolling dice, it's not a campaign setting for D&D. It's its own separate game, and I think that's very important to remember.
Well, here's the thing too. When we kind of sat down to look at this, I mean, if you look at open source material, you're going to basically borrow from 2 things that's considered open source: basic fantasy rules and D&D. Okay, text, building blocks, things that were established even before D&D kind of have that groundwork about how things work. And everything else that is unique to a world is something that's built upon that template and changed. And that's where we started. When we set out to do this, it's like, okay, well, everybody is basically starting at a level 1. We want you to start with a character that you're going to build up. Chad, you look like you're meditating.
Just soaking it all in.
No, I'm just kind of laughing. I'm like, he just looks like he's like meditating. I'm like, do we have magic headphones where you're listening to Prince?
No.
Anyway, and that was kind of the things that we were talking about last year. It's like, well, here it is, because I printed out everything else. Let's start. Let's see what we're going to do. There were supplements that I forgot, and then it just kind of took time of putting everything together and then adding our own little dose of like storytelling. And one of those things, and to the lead illustrator, James Chapman, his credit is, we didn't have a map. It's like, well, what's this world look like? What are the kingdoms? And here's a little tip for everybody. If you're writing your first fantasy novel and you have a basic story, and I did, that's great. That's great to outline. Do not start writing until you've built the world, because you don't want to be halfway through it like, okay, I don't really understand what's going on. I've mentioned a few things, and then you have to take 2 months off to actually build the world and explore kingdoms and towns and royal houses and yada, yada, yada that goes into it. That's going to actually help further your story that you're trying to tell. The world building has to come first, and you have to, look at it as, well, what is this region? What's that region? Why do we have these kingdoms? What are these kingdoms like? Or, what's the politics and everything else? And as I said, we didn't really have anything. And then within a week, James is like, I'll get that map for you. And then myself was like, oh, that kind of makes sense. Now we're kind of picturing where things are and where these kingdoms are and stuff like that. Anyway, again, to my point about where you start, I think and I've heard people talk about trying to build something and they want to make it more like D&D. I don't think you really can make it like 5th edition D&D. That's their thing that's been refined. I think you have to start with those basic building blocks and what basic fantasy rules really are, and then develop. Scott made a great point when I sent him an early edition of the role-playing book. You told me it's a good starting point, but there's a lot that should be changed once you get to a 2nd edition, right?
Yeah. No, I'm not gonna lie. I did say that, and I do remember one of the biggest things that I poked at you, and something that the DMs constantly overthink. I was like, "What's your economy?" And you went, "What?" And I was like, "Yeah, what's your economic structure? How does currency break down in exchange?" And you went, "Fuck!"
There's always something I'm not thinking about. And to the credit, that is actually in the role playing book. I just kind of glossed over it. It does actually break everything down. It's just when we started playing a campaign, we were only dealing with certain like gold pieces and what they represented and stuff. And like I said, for anybody that gets a copy of the role playing book, the economy is in there. It does break it down in pieces.
It's definitely.
But there's just little things you remember, and I think that's what makes a collaborative effort better. Is you can have one single vision, but I will attribute this to like the expanded universe of Star Wars. I don't know if George Lucas could have come up with every great thing that was there. I think having great writers be able to write in the expanded universe and tell great tales and take these characters, like I think Timothy Zahn is just as important in telling further stories of Luke and Han and all that as George Lucas was. I think Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau have proven that you've created this world and you have characters, but we've got other characters that connect to each other, that help, that are just as important and tell a bigger story. And that's the greatness of role playing. Also, if you come up with, go ahead.
I was going to say, and to touch on that point real quick, it's also good to have an outside source, especially if you are an inspiration, for the creative process, or you are the creative process for whatever you're making. It's also good to have an outside perspective that can be a boundary, that can keep you reined in, because sometimes when you get creative, you get so passionate about making something and you're like, yeah, and then you share it with somebody and people go, yeah, that's cool, but that's a lot. And you're like, oh, fuck me. Okay, yeah, you're right. And then, but so it's good to kind of have people that are there to just kind of also go, hey, hold on, why don't you turn around? You missed a spot.
Right. It, for every great writer that was out there, there's always a good editor. I mean, what is it? The famous line, or why the famous editor Max Perkins, who edited Hemingway and Thomas Wolfe and all that, who kind of Thomas Wolfe was this great writer that, I mean, he could write 5 pages talking about how blue someone's eyes were and how they drew them in, and he fell in love and all this. It was like, you wrote 5 pages on it. You can write 2 paragraphs that make the same point. It takes a different perspective to help scale it back to a point. And especially when you're dealing with a fantasy world, and it's like, because there's so much there. So kind of wonder too if George R.R. Martin had some help. Maybe he'd actually had finished some books by now. Just throwing that out there.
That fat bastard.
That's interesting.
George R. R. Martin. I mean, and what pisses me off about that dude is how bitchy he gets to his fans. It's like, well,
Yeah.
you told everybody 2 more books were coming, and it's been a decade, and you've put out a bunch of other projects that literally no one cares about, and then your fans get annoyed because they've been waiting for this story forever and ever, and you just shit on them.
Mm-hmm.
What a turd. I don't care if those books ever come out. I'm not giving him another damn cent.
Right. And then, then you weigh in on how controversial the last 2 seasons of the TV show were. Like, well, maybe they wouldn't have been if you had actually finished and they went off.
Or maybe, consulted on it a little bit, said, hey, you should go here, maybe do this there. No, he's just a fat fuck on his couch eating Cheetos naked, watching, whatever.
Right. So one of the things that
I don't like him, if you hadn't noticed.
Yeah, you're subtle. You're very subtle about it.
One of the things that I kind of wanted with the Anmar Chronicles when this came about is to really actually understand, the various kingdoms, and to, while you have an Elven kingdom, a Dwarven kingdom, and all that, you have elements that are similar to Lord of the Rings, which, by the way, while I do not read every review on Amazon or Barnes & Noble of my books, I do kind of skim sometimes to make sure at least my star rating is up. I had one review, speaking of why I feel for the makers of this Dune movie, is someone who said, it feels very familiar, like I've read this before. And I'm like, you mean you've read stories of myth where people are using the same template of Joseph Campbell's Hero with 1,000 Faces? It happens. It might seem familiar, but there's also unique things that are, unique to this world. I'm not rewriting Lord of the Rings here. Also, there are elves and other fantasy stories and dwarves.
Well, and that was, and I don't know when we're allowed to ask questions, but that's a question I was going to ask you is what is a fear of yours, especially as a creator of this, because there's always going to be the people who go, yeah, but that came first, and yeah, that came first. Yeah, we know, but where are you like trying not to be like, oh, well, I don't want to be so overly similar with this, or if there is similarity from this, I feel it's okay because this is my inspiration, sort of thing.
I really like the idea of royal houses that are always kind of in conflict or with each other, whatever, and hierarchy and stuff. And I'll use Tolkien as an example. I don't know if he never really centered so much on that. It's very subtle and all that. I mean, his Lord of the Rings, if you look at it in a grand scope of things, it seems like a very small world, that we're familiar with it. And while he did establish world building, with prequels and other things, you don't really know the history of houses or anything. You just kind of know it within this story, and I don't know if there is much literature out there about that, or people have expanded on it.
Silmarillion. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I know, but I'm not discounting that at all.
No, I know. I'm just being a dickhead.
No way.
I wanted to actually look at that each kingdom had like their own little kind of hierarchy and royal houses and how they chose their kings and in stuff like that. In something that was, unique. Like for example, the Kingdom of Belmere, which I have a banner hanging up, and the best way that I can describe it is like, well, if you're thinking of Game of Thrones, they're like Winterfell. But while they have a succession of families that they choose their king, if the bloodline runs out, it is the royal houses that kind of choose the best of another house, and vote on it. So there's politics involved and influence and all that, and also can lead to rebellions and civil wars and stuff. And I had established that there was a rebellion when there was called into question a royal house that their bloodline was not as pure and they weren't really. So, somebody else.
The age of battle piety.
Right. Which will actually lead into future stories about characters that I'm writing and stuff. I thought that was kind of all that, but I also took like one kingdom that it wasn't like you had your royal houses, that you also had providences, and each providence had a legion, and that legion was known and with their commanders, and it was all people within that hierarchy. And I didn't really see that so much established in other fantasy so much, but I also attributed it more to kind of like the Roman Empire in certain elements of hierarchy. I personally look at it from when you're attributing something to history, you're borrowing, well, this kind of worked well, then you're using that as a metaphor. Obviously Game of Thrones, you can pretty much pinpoint every one of those characters and what historical figure they're kind of based off of. It's not hard if you know your history. So for me, that's one of the things that I think that I wanted to set apart is how these kingdoms established in their hierarchies and the troubles they have within each other, and then how you deal with the free towns. But that each kingdom was very, very different from each other. Whereas barbarians have clans, and the same thing with halflings. So it's a little bit different. I don't know if that makes sense or not.
Yeah,
Okay.
Kind of.
I apologize, everybody. I'm
all right, while you're recovering from the coughing thing here, I'm gonna drop some breaking news on everybody. Hasbro just revealed the new line of the Star Wars Black Series, the 6-inch Black Series. It will include Cobb Vanth, Migs Mayfield on Morak, Boba Fett before he gets his armor back, and the Mandalorian with the shiny armor of Baby Yoda and the Ice Spider. So nice. Those are coming next summer. So I just thought everybody would like to know that because I collect the shit out of those things, and I will be pre-ordering all of them.
And I did see that they are releasing the Leia saber from in the Black Series in October next year.
Yep.
Okay, so if anybody wants to know what's on their Christmas list.
On my wife's. She's been wanting that since she saw it.
So anyway, getting back to fantasy. As I said about role playing, you kind of have to start with somewhere, and that's where this book really is. And also, the first campaign that's actually included in the role playing book, Turning to Timberhelm. that was another kind of aspect is, where is this in a timeline compared to other things? And we had to establish something of, well, this is what's going on. So there's a character that sets up this campaign that's also a character in my book series, and, nearly 85 years later. And again, they're elves, so they have long lives. But what is really going on in this world when you're dealing, because the campaign is about recovering a magical artifact, and you're dealing with the politics of not even 100 years after magic has come back into the world and trying to control things, but also dealing with how the world reacts to that kind of power that is considered a myth. Do you try to control it for yourself? Do you really want that power? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? All of those things that I think are kind of essential elements of any storytelling about myth, and what you deal with something that's different or more powerful. And obviously we've seen that in forms of sci-fi, but we started beta testing this campaign, and I didn't even really think about all of these things. And then when I rewrote it, it was like, okay, well, there has to be how it ties into the overall history, because if it's going to become lore, you have to tie into characters that are being established.
I had a quick question for you, Marcus. In regards to, so magic come back, the gods are gone. Are you going to have any groups that are like cultists that are trying to use magic to bring the gods back, or some type of thing like that? Almost like some type of cult, like almost in D&D, an similar equivalent would be like the Red Wizards of Thay, or
right.
Or to use borrow from another role-playing game, even though it's a video game, not a pen and paper. The what do they call them? The cultists from Oblivion.
The Red Dawn.
Oh, the Red Dawn.
Red Dawn. So they're trying to bring back shit, never mind. Irrelevant.
But yeah,
well,
so some type of cult, and it doesn't all have to, by the way, it doesn't have to be all wearing robes and obvious cults too. It could almost be like a group like the Masons, where they're in through maybe these cults have infiltrated the governments of all the different kingdoms, and you've got this network of people that are more worried about gods than political borders.
So in answer to your question, yes and no.
Okay.
I can't, only because it's something that's coming out in future storytelling that we don't want to quite give away. The only way that I can answer that question is something that has been established, is a thing called the Oracles of Aridity, which are kind of a cultist group that doesn't really want magic back in the world, and what special powers are in the world, they want to control for themselves to be more powerful. So their nefarious intentions really is simply that they just want to control whatever it is for them, to be the most powerful, whatever. But they're also the people that, in the story of the gods, didn't want gods to be powerful. They didn't like the gods, and we're really the instruments in, behind the scenes of the war with the gods, even though the war was started by one god who wanted to be the only god. So it's really followers of that god called Anmar, the god of war. But in terms of talking about a group that wants to bring back the gods, yes and no. That's the only way I can answer that question, because I don't want to give anything away in storytelling. But I think you're always going to have, anytime you're dealing with religious elements or faith or whatever, and in this world, when you're dealing with gods, you're always going to have opposing forces about how you look at it. So I think it's kind of a foregone conclusion that something would be born out of that. It's just a matter of when and what their true motivations are, without revealing major plot points. That makes sense? Is that the best way? Without revealing anything too much?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right.
No, that was good.
Yeah. All right. I know. I mean, part of what we are trying to do with this fantasy world is have other writers that are writing stories and establishing some of the lore. So those are things that have to be talked about and kind of established, beforehand. But I don't know if we're quite there yet. We're at a point where you have your kingdoms, you have what the world is 100 years after the fall of the gods. You have the role-playing aspects where you can start telling stories. And really what we are trying to do with the role-playing game is that the first edition should really be for the first age. Like, we're not even establishing monsters as you know it, or the creation of it, until the second age, after the second war of magic, because they're born out of that. And you're also dealing with like empires, the expansion of Anmar as a world beyond what it really is. So I mean, that was another thing, is like, what are these three ages? What is really happening in these three ages? Are there dragons right off the bat? And there aren't. Also, I kind of feel like dragon stories have been kind of done to death. To make it more unique, I want them to be more specific instead of, hey, there's dragons. Now, I would never say this to Aaron, but but I want to preface this statement. I'm almost like, I think we've kind of done dragon stories done to death, haven't we? But
especially when they're just, when there's no depth to them, they're just there.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because if you read up on dragons and regardless of what your game or mythology is, they're always portrayed as extremely intelligent creatures.
Yeah, they're always very sentient. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so then why are they always written from such a, big monster, kill it?
Right.
I think the only dragon I've ever appreciated in modern literature was Ferromax from the Dresden Files, because you don't know that he's a dragon until Harry figures it out, because he's in the guise of, you see him at Bianca's party and he's in the garb of a Roman centurion, and it's not until Harry sees him smoke coming out of the nose and realizes he's not the cigarette.
Right. One of my favorite movies, from the 90s. Remember that movie Dragonheart, where Sean Connery was the dragon?
And they mapped the face off of his face. So when he pops out of the water and he sees the sheep and he's like, hello.
Oh.
It's kind of like, this is James Bond as a dragon. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was a great movie. And you always wanted to know more about, that world. It felt very short, but there was so much lore, behind it. I think that actually came out in '96. Isn't that movie 25 years old now?
It's give or take.
Yeah, it's getting up there.
Yeah.
There have been so many needless bastardized sequels of it.
I was just about to say that, and I was like, he was the last dragon. Why are there so many sequels?
Yeah.
It's like, what they really should have done was a prequel to that from 100 years or 200 years prior, where dragons were everywhere and they were part of society. That could have been interesting, but no, it's the last dragon, the next to last dragon, the next to last dragon.
Ridiculous sequels is, for every actor who was involved, or film crew that was involved, that got paid for some work, good job.
Yeah.
Other than that, it's like, how many sequels to the Scorpion King have they made at this point?
Oh God,
good Lord!
Yeah, well,
at some point, you're becoming the Fast and Furious of the Scorpion King movies.
Well, it's whatever the next WWE star that they want to push into the movies. That's we'll just make him the next Scorpion King. And it's true too. Like all of them are, like the rock, but lesser. Maybe they're the pebble.
Well, anyway, we're gonna
Rebel.
close this out a little bit about what we like about fantasy worlds. We'll talk a bit more about the Anmar Chronicles. I think one of the things that's exciting is when you get to kind of start from the ground up, and you've played in other fantasy worlds, and you've dealt with things that you like, you dislike, and you're kind of like, I'm always fond of saying to people that heavily criticize stuff, fine, you don't like it, go off and make your own thing. And this is kind of putting my money where my mouth is and saying, like, there are things in fantasy that I don't like. Guess what? I get to rectify that by creating something and bringing other people into it to be collaborative and establishing our own thing. Okay. And people are going to criticize and like or dislike it, whatever. But at the same time, it's like we are creating something that we think would be cool. And it isn't just one person, it should be collaborative. Hence why I rely on friends to get perspective about stuff and to be brutally honest, or remind me of the shit that I didn't think of, like money. Anyway, but as I said, I think the importance is kind of, starting at the very beginning in the timeline and saying, don't have all this backstory that you allude to, that you haven't really established. And unfortunately, that's kind of the stuff that pisses me off about Game of Thrones. Is like, I want to know more about that world. But at the same time, I kind of want to go back to the prequels. Like, you told me this great little story, but you've got all this history. And I'm glad you're establishing some of it. But it's the same, with Star Wars. It's like, you've got all.
Oh, please, can we get the Old Republic already?
I know. It's like, come on. Take me back to that and start telling those stories, which I think in a lot of ways are kind of better than what you have.
It's like, all Star Wars fans, whether you're an OT fan, a PT fan, or a sequel trilogy fan, all want the Old Republic. Disney. How about a Rogue Squadron movie that has nothing to do with the original Rogue Squadron? No. It's not what we want.
Not what we asked for. But, what do we know?
Yeah, we're only fans that are going to consume it, pay for it, and buy all the toys.
Keep pissing us
off. By the way, if you're one of those people that want the Old Republic, AllCon in Dallas is coming back for just a short little weekend. It's basically to bring everybody back together who, were at the convention in 2020 when it got canceled on opening night. Todd, the director of it, emailed me and asked if we'd like to continue our panel since we actually only got to do it one night. And it was titled Disney and Star Wars, Is It a Match Made in Heaven? I was like, yes, let's do it. But we actually have more to talk about because we've had season 2 of, The Mandalorian and so much other stuff. But if you're one of those that needs like gripe session or like group therapy, come together with other fans to talk about why we need the Old Republic, you come to AllCon in Dallas this weekend. We're going to be doing our panel on Thursday night at 7 and not Thursday, but Friday at 7 and a panel on Saturday at 5. And we will talk about it. We will share your pain as a Star
I can
Wars.
actually make both panels this year. Yes.
Yes. And I'm sure that we can coax Brendan, wink, wink, and bring some of his delicious beer from Crafting Growler.
Yeah, I can arrange that. Yeah, I do have to leave after the panel on Saturday because I have an event at Crafting Growler that night. But
right.
Yeah, but I can be there both Friday and Saturday.
We totally get it. But I'm just letting people that are in Dallas that are watching this know what's going on, and we'll be talking a little bit about Star Wars. So, the one thing that I will wrap up and say this about the Anmar Chronicles. There's many, many more things we can discuss. You should check it out at AnnmarChronicles.com. It's a starting point on a website. Check out some of the illustrations done by James Chapman. You can easily buy my new book, The Rangers of Liberus, which establishes the first series and where the world is right before where magic will come back into the world, because it's obvious that it will. but also take a look at the role-playing book, get a little preview of it, and see what we've done. But I think it's very, very important to start, kind of from a linear standpoint of we're starting at the beginning of, after the fall of the gods. Before we're not jumping into the second age, and then there was the first age, and blah blah blah. See, that's another thing that kind of made me mad about Lord of the Rings. It's like you were kind of in the second age, and now we start the third age of Middle Earth. I want to know everything behind it. You allude to these events. What's the world going up to it? So we're just going to start from the beginning, and we're going to tell you the stories in the first age, and then in the years to come, get to the second age, and then the third age. And we're just going to keep you in kind of a linear timeline because, we're human beings and we think in linear terms. But the role-playing aspect of it is you can jump around and start your own campaign and help us establish it as lore as we are building that history that's unfolding. And we hope that people that jump into Anmar start playing this, you come up with a really good campaign, establish characters. We want to know about it. We want you to help us establish history, through the campaigns, which the Journey to Timberhelm campaign is already established lore that happens 85 years after the War of Magic. And we'll be establishing more as we build a book of campaigns that we all kind of collaborate on. But at the same time too, we didn't just create a simple game board. When we were talking about building a game board, it is printed on a vinyl map that you can easily fold up, like this, and then unroll for your gameplay. We actually have the kingdom banners and their sigils on there, and a little map of what Anmar is. So you actually are more familiar with the world than it just being a simple map of a forest or whatever. We just thought it was kind of important to have everything in there. And then we established some really cool landscapes. As Scott pointed out this week, we have a really cool island one, which I was thinking about an island campaign this past week when we used that map. We use some free use maps that are out there that can be used for fantasy. But we offered a couple of forest and general, and then a winter campaign. And we're going to be establishing a lot more game boards that you can buy off the website. But for anybody that's looking to jump into a new fantasy world and start from the beginning and help us establish mythology, lore, all of it. And as Brendan alluded to, something that will be coming that we can't quite tell you about yet. Then the Anmar Chronicles is something to check out. And one of the great things too is there's tons of stuff on Amazon for just general miniatures and all that can be used in any fantasy world. I have found some really good stuff for campaigns at my house. And you can get packages of 20-sided dice pretty inexpensive. So anyway, that's what we're doing with it. And I wanted to thank everybody for collaboration that's helped us, get to this point as we, continue to go forward, especially when we have new editions of what we're doing in the coming years. So, but I don't know about you guys. As much as I like D&D, I think it's time that we all jump into a new world, new lore, new mythology. I'm not saying D&D is done or whatever, but after 40 years, I think
a fresh perspective.
Yeah. So, and nothing against Pathfinder or World of Warcraft or anything like that. I just think it's just time to have new things and stuff. By the way, one of the things that we also want to thank James Chapman out there for making these sigils. Really love the sigil in the background in the studio of the bear with the double axes for Belmir. And we kind of came up with slogans for each kingdom. The slogan for Belmir is, by the blood of the old gods, we defend what is ours. We fight for those who do not. And what was the? There was one I was asking Brendan about. We were talking about dwarves, and the quote for that kingdom was, "Pride and anger are the jewels that build a kingdom," which I thought was a very, very dwarf thing to say. Yeah. Anyway, we will hopefully be back next week with another podcast when Alex is able to join us and for James Bond. But as I said, AnnmarChronicles.com is where you can check out this new fantasy world. If you're itching to get back into a campaign or start something. And one thing I think the pandemic has kind of shown us is if we can't really go out to places and drink and be like it was normal, well, then I guess you can go to someone's house and drink with friends and, play tabletop fantasy and have a potluck and be just as content. Right, guys?
Right.
Yeah, totes.
So.
Totes.
Scott and his old school lingo. Anyway, all right. We're going to get out of here, everybody. Thanks for checking us out this Saturday. We're glad to be back for a podcast. It's, I remember one thing I wanted to say as I got reminded of my 25th high school reunion here. Somebody was telling that the slogan at the high school I graduated at, the mascot was is a hornet. And the principal was always fond of saying, "It's a great day to be alive and be a hornet." Which looking back was kind of hokey. And I was like, but you know what it is? It's a great day to be alive and be a nerd. Okay, I guess I'm going to be a little hokey, and you guys are like, okay.
A little Clark? Jesus. The Griswold buff left. You want to fucking get on it already?
Whatever.
You just call him Robinson does.
Thank you, everybody. Time to say goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.